camera.
If any action would have happened, any cars or anything left your house, I would have
found it. Like right in that area, it should have picked me.
Oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way.
You know where that tree is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He sat down on the edge of a steel bunk in a prison in Wisconsin, picked up a pen, and wrote a sentence so deranged that the woman reading it had to put the letter down. He compared himself to Jesus, not as a metaphor, not as a slip of the pen. He wrote that God had chosen him deliberately, and that the suffering he was enduring inside that cell was a kind of crucifixion. Sit with that for a second. The man writing those words strangled his pregnant wife in their own bedroom. Then he drove her body and his 2 little girls, still breathing, out to an oil field before sunrise. By the time the Colorado sun came up on August 13, 2018, Bella was 4, Celeste was 3, and neither of them would ever come home again. And that is the man who picked up a pen 7 years later and told a stranger he understood what Christ went through on the cross. But here's the part almost nobody is talking about. The letter isn't even the strangest thing happening inside that prison right now, because the people who watch him every single day, the ones who walk past his door at 3 in the morning, have started saying something, quietly, off the record, and what they're describing isn't remorse. It isn't a breakdown. It's something else entirely. They say Chris Watts is not the same man who walked into that prison. They say he's not normal anymore. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what's happening to him inside that cell in June of 2026. And it's not what you think. If you want the truth on cases like this one, documented, sourced, and told the way these victims actually deserve, subscribe right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what comes next goes deeper than anything currently being reported. Let's go back to the beginning of the after. Most people think the story of Chris Watts ended in that courtroom. It didn't. It just went quiet. On November 19, 2018, Judge Marcelo Kopkow looked down at him and said something he'd never said in 17 years on the bench. This, he said, was perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime he had handled out of the thousands of cases he had seen, and then he handed down a sentence built to make sure Chris Watts never breathed free air again. 5 life sentences, plus an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of his wife's pregnancy, plus 36 more for hiding their bodies. But here's the detail that should stop you cold. He wasn't even safe in his own state. Just weeks after sentencing, on December 3, 2018, Colorado quietly loaded him into a transport vehicle and drove him over 1,000 miles away, out of state entirely, to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The official reason? Safety. His notoriety made him a target for violence from other inmates. Think about what that actually means. A man enters the prison system. Within weeks, not years, the threat against him is so serious that the only solution is to move him across state lines under an interstate compact reserved for inmates who pose a genuine safety crisis. That's not a routine transfer. That's a system saying, we cannot keep this man alive here. So what was happening inside that Colorado facility in those first weeks? No press conference ever answered it. The transfer happened. The statement said, safety. And the door closed. But the place they sent him to, that wasn't random either. And what he would become inside its walls is where this story turns genuinely disturbing. Here's what we can confirm about his life inside. The publicly reported picture is a man who keeps to himself, attends Bible study, and works as a custodian. On paper, almost mundane. But here's what doesn't make it into the official record. And this is where the people inside start to talk. Because in any prison, there are 2 systems. There's the official one, the cell assignments, the work details, the disciplinary write-ups. And then there's the other one, the unwritten one, the one every inmate understands within days of arriving, the one nobody says out loud. It's a hierarchy, and it's built entirely on what you did. At the very bottom of that hierarchy, across every prison, in every state, for as long as anyone has kept records, sit the men who harmed children. The reason is brutally simple. A huge share of the men inside are fathers. They carry photographs. They count down days hoping to see their kids again someday. And then, they're forced to share air with a man who had exactly that. A wife, 2 daughters who adored him, a whole family, and chose to erase it. That kind of man doesn't need a reason to be targeted. His face is the reason. So Chris Watts moves through that facility a certain way. Reports from former inmates describe him keeping his head down, avoiding open spaces, choosing the cell over the yard every single time. The room that's slowly destroying his mind is also the only place he's safe. And researchers who study incarceration have a name for what living like that does to a person. They call it chronic threat awareness, a state of alertness that never switches off. There's no Tuesday morning where the danger lifts. No moment the guard comes down. It just grinds, year after year. And according to the people who walk those halls, it has started to show, in ways they say they've never quite seen before. That's next. This is the part that's been spreading in whispers. Now, I want to be straight with you, because this channel doesn't traffic in nonsense. Some of what circulates about Chris Watts behind bars comes from inmates, pen pals, and secondhand sources, and those people are not always reliable. So I'm going to tell you what's reported, and flag clearly where it's a claim versus a fact. Here's what is documented, in his own handwriting. The man writes, constantly, since the start of his sentence, he's received a flood of letters, many from women who found him handsome and felt compassion for him. He started writing them back. He developed pen pals. A few of them stuck. And when a Netflix documentary brought the case roaring back, the mail surged again. A source with knowledge of his daily life has said his correspondence isn't a hobby. It's the center of his existence. The next letter, the next reply, the next sign that someone, anyone, on the outside is still thinking about him. Now, look at what he actually writes. On the surface, remorse. He writes about the weight he carries. He uses the language of a man taking responsibility. And then, in the very next breath, the story shifts. In recent letters, he insisted he has always taken full responsibility, and then in the same passage blamed his mistress, calling her a wicked woman who misled him. He declared himself a new man, a new creature, who has confessed his sins and been forgiven by God. The wife he strangled, the daughters he smothered, and the framing that keeps surfacing is that he's the one who's been transformed. And then came the letter. In October 2025, writing to a woman, Chris Watts put it in black and white. God had a plan for me. He wants me in prison. This is his will, just like it was his will for Jesus to die for us. He went on. He wants to bring people closer to him through my suffering, and added that while he'll never fully understand what Christ endured on the cross, his own trials had given him a glimpse of it. A glimpse of the crucifixion. That is a man who murdered his entire family, comparing his prison sentence to the death of Christ. And this is where the whispers from inside start to make a terrible kind of sense. Because alongside the letters, there are the claims, and I'm labeling them as claims. Former inmates and people in contact with the prison have described a man who latches onto any connection with frightening intensity, who organizes his entire day around the next letter, whose grip on what's normal and what's desperate seems to have slipped somewhere along the way. Whether or not you trust every voice making those claims, the documented evidence points in the same direction as the whispers. The handwriting alone tells you something has changed in him. A man who can compare himself to Jesus from inside the cell where he's serving 5 life sentences for killing his children is not a man whose mind is operating where it used to. The guards may not be wrong. There's one more thing, and it's the part almost nobody covering this case is willing to sit with. At the sentencing, Shanann's father, Frank Rizuchek, stood up and looked at the man who took his daughter, his grandbabies, and an unborn grandson. A little boy who was going to be named Nico. He called him heartless. He called him evil. He told him he'd carried them out like trash. He said prison was too good for him, and that he hoped Chris Watts saw his wife and daughters every time he tried to sleep at night. That was the wish, that Chris Watts would carry the full, crushing weight of what he did, every day, with complete awareness, for the rest of his life. It is one of the most human things a destroyed father could ask for. But here's what the letters force us to ask. Is that wish actually being granted? Because a man who's reframed himself as a martyr, a new creature, forgiven, chosen by God, suffering like Christ, is that a man drowning in the weight Frank Rizuchek wanted him to carry? Or is that a man who has quietly built himself a story where he is no longer the villain, but the saint? That's the chilling part. Not that he's in agony, but that he may have found a way to make the agony mean something to himself. He is 40 years old. If he lives a normal lifespan, he has more than 3 decades left inside that cell. And nothing in the record, not the letters, not the claims from inside, points to a man heading toward peace or toward the reckoning a grieving father asked for. It points to a man slowly becoming someone else entirely. So, I'll leave you with 2 questions, and I read every comment. First, does what's coming out of that cell in 2026 change how you see where this case stands? Or does it leave you exactly where you already were? And second, knowing what Frank Rzucek asked for at that sentencing, do you believe his wish is being fulfilled inside that prison right now? Or has Chris Watts found a way around it? Be honest. Tell me below. And if you want the truth on cases like this, sourced, documented, and told the way these victims deserve, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with me, because the next chapter of this story is already being written, in his own handwriting,